In this video I explain the most common reasons why shrimp die in the aquarium and how you can prevent it. Therefore we will go through a checklist step by step which is based on more than 10 years of my experience in shrimp keeping, and I'm quite confident that we will be able to identify the problem in your aquarium. So if you want to prevent your shrimps from dying, or you already have problems with dead animals, stay tuned. Many shrimps are actually quite easy to keep and breed in the aquarium. As these small invertebrates don't live very long, at 2 years individual deaths are not uncommon and are not really a cause for concern. However, if an increasing number of deaths occurs within a short period of time, you should quickly investigate the cause and act quickly. Sometimes, however, the process is much more gradual and subtle, as you simply see less and less shrimp until you can no longer find any at all. Recently I've received an increasing number of questions and messages from people wanting to know why their shrimps are dying. There can of course be many reasons for this, as every aquarium is different, but it is usually down to certain factors, and I will go into these in this video. For this purpose I've created this ultimate checklist which we will now go through step by step. So before we start directly with the content, I would like to tell you one more thing. I'm not Captain Superman either, and I made a lot of mistakes myself at the beginning of the hobby and had to learn from negative experiences. So I hope this video helps you to avoid some mistakes right from the start. Guys, let's start with the basics. The parameters. The first point I would like to talk about is the water parameters. This may seem a bit obvious to you, but in fact inappropriate water parameters are often the reason why shrimps die. Here you can see an overview of the range of tolerated water parameters for the different shrimp species. Neocaridina's like neutral water to harder water, which means that treated tap water can be used. However, Neocaridinas are generally more robust and tolerant when it comes to water parameters. But tap water should not be used for keeping Caridina, such as bee shrimps or Sulawesi shrimps and so on. Caridina shrimps like bee shrimps need very soft, slightly acidic water to survive. For this, RO water should be remineralized with special salts, such as bee shrimp from salty shrimp. Sulawesi shrimps require very specific water parameters, and you should also use RO water and the suitable Sulawesi salt here. But you should also keep an eye on the temperature. In my experience, 23 to 24 degrees Celsius is a sweet spot for Neocaridinas. When keeping Caridinas, on the other hand, 24 degrees should not be exceeded. Sulawesi shrimps require very high temperatures of 27 degrees and higher. If you have checked your water parameters and you are sure that everything is fine, then the new tank syndrome could be the cause. I always recommend cycling shrimp aquariums for a few weeks and letting them mature before adding shrimps. Give the aquarium time to consolidate the so-called nitrogen cycle. Ammonia and nitrite in particular play a role here. Ammonia can be produced in increasing proportions, especially in water with a pH above 7. Particularly sensitive shrimps that require very clean water, such as Caridina shrimps, react even at very low concentrations, showing signs of poisoning such as wriggling and dropping dead. Although shrimps are not as sensitive to nitrite as fish, Caridina and Sulawesi shrimps in particular react negatively to values from 0.3 ppm nitrite, with loss of appetite for example, and can die from this if it increases further. Shrimps such as Neocaridinas and Amano shrimps are much more robust here and can withstand significantly higher values. So if you do have a problem with nitrite or ammonia, you should try to get it out of the water as quickly as possible. The only temporary measure that helps here is a large water change and the introduction of beneficial bacteria to support the nitrogen cycle. In addition to that, new aquariums have simply not yet formed enough microbiology. Shrimps love to graze the hardscape, the substrate and also the filter sponge for algae, bacteria and any form of biofilm. And baby shrimps in particular are dependent on this biofilm to survive. However, this biofilm takes time to form, and in aquariums that have only been running for a few days, it is not sufficiently available. Another mistake that is often made is incorrect or no acclimation. Shrimps need a stable environment and time to adapt. So what you should never do is pour the shrimp directly into the aquarium after purchase. Especially sensitive species like Charidinas can die very quickly. But even more robust Neocharidinas don't like this abrupt transfer. You have spent loads of time planning the aquarium, setting it up, and you have waited for the tank being cycled. And maybe you also had to wait until you finally found the shrimp you wanted. So there is no reason to rush the process unnecessarily now that you have practically reached your goal. These 2 to 3 hours time for acclimation really don't matter anymore. So how should you acclimatize your shrimps properly? Use an air hose with a valve and let the water from the aquarium drip slowly into the container or transport bag. After 2 to 3 hours you can then transfer the shrimps. This gives the animals time to get used to the water and you have control over the process. And you don't have to rely on luck that as many animals as possible survive. But to be honest, sometimes even the perfect acclimation doesn't help. If the animals are too stressed during transport, for example, sometimes individual death cannot be prevented. I have just mentioned the issue of consistency, and in my opinion consistency in shrimp aquariums is what many people struggle with the most. Shrimps need consistent conditions in the aquarium in order to feel comfortable and survive in the long term. In particular, the already mentioned water parameters and the temperature should be kept very consistent. So what does this mean in practice? Do not carry out unnecessarily large water changes of 70% or so. Instead, do smaller water changes more frequently. Always use the same water for water changes and the temperature should be very close to what you have in the tank. So when you mix your water, for example, always use the same ratio or the same amount of salt or whatever. With more sensitive shrimp species, for example, you can also let the fresh water drip slowly into the tank. The aquarium should also not be placed in rooms that are exposed to large temperature fluctuations. A location by a window with direct sunlight, for example, is rather unfavorable. What would happen in this case is that the water heats up during the day in the blazing sun and cools down again when the sun disappears. It is exactly this type of fluctuation that needs to be avoided. Don't do what we Germans do on the German highway and drive at 250 km per hour and then slow down to 130 because the car in front is blocking the left lane and then accelerate back up to 200 for 500 meters before finally leaving the highway. Rather drive constantly at 130 km per hour. The next problem that can lead to the death of a shrimp is molting problems. Shrimps, like other invertebrates, have to molt regularly in order to grow. This process is very stressful for the animal and it is very vulnerable during and after the process. If the conditions are not right, death can also occur during molting. Incorrect feeding and a lack of nutrients can lead to molting problems, for instance. If you feed excessive amounts of animal protein, such as brine shrimps, bloodworms and so on, the animals grow very quickly, but it can happen that the formation of the new carapace does not keep up with the speed. Animal food also contains a lot of cholesterol, which is needed by the shrimps for molting but can lead to premature molting if too much is fed. So don't overdo it with the animal protein. Biofilm, algae and bacteria also contain a lot of protein with significantly less cholesterol. In addition to proteins, minerals are crucial for building a new carapace. Minerals such as calcium, magnesium, iron and potassium are mainly absorbed through the food. In any case, you should make sure that your animals have a good supply of minerals. Algae generally contain a lot of minerals. However, if there are increased molting problems, you should feed special mineral food. Excessively high phosphate and nitrite levels, as well as fluctuation in pH, KH and GH can cause problems. Sometimes, however, animals simply die due to old age during molting, or because they were weakened by a bacterial infection, for example. Of course, we shrimp keepers cannot always prevent these cases. Another common problem is incorrect feeding or overfeeding. As we have already discussed, high and fluctuating nitrate and phosphate levels can have negative consequences for the well-being of your shrimps and can even kill them. If the neighbor's child, for example, slips out the food can, it can quickly become uncomfortable for the animals in the aquarium. Ammonia spikes or higher nitrite levels must be avoided at all costs. But we also want to avoid a significant increase in nitrate levels. The value of 10 ppm in the Caridina or Sulawesi aquarium should not be exceeded. For Neocaridinas, 25 ppm should be regarded as the upper limit. Avoid reaching this limit. You should only feed small portions at a time so that the animals can eat the food completely in a short time. Leftover food should then be removed from the tank. In this case, snails are great tank mates for shrimps, as they are very good at finding and eating leftover food. I have snails in most of my shrimp tanks. I always highly recommend keeping plants in the shrimp aquarium. Firstly, the shrimps feel more comfortable, and secondly, they absorb the excess nutrients such as nitrate and phosphate. Especially floating plants are ideal for shrimp tanks. And I also always recommend using a feeding dish and a feeding pipe. Shrimps are sloppy eaters, and a feeding bowl reduces the risk of food residues getting into the substrate and rotting there. These rotting spots can form hydrogen sulfide, which can get into the water column when the substrate is churned up or plants are uprooted and removed. Shrimps can also become poisoned by this and die. Tank design. As far as aquarium design is concerned, I believe there are 3 mistakes that can be fatal for shrimps. In most cases, sponge filters are probably used in shrimp aquariums. These are absolutely shrimp safe if sponges with 30 ppi are used. The situation is different with canister filters and hang-on bag filters, as their inlet pipes are not secured and therefore shrimps can simply be sucked in. It is very important to protect these pipes with a sponge, as otherwise the shrimp offspring will regularly be shredded in the filter. The second mistake that is often made is not using a cover for shrimp tanks. Shrimps are good climbers and can climb out of the tank on cables or air tubes. The animals then usually dry out and die next to the aquarium. The exception is Amano shrimps, which can still cover considerable distances on land before they dry out and die. If you want to eliminate this risk, your tank should always be well covered. To be honest, I also have a few uncovered aquariums. It has rarely happened that a shrimp has escaped, but basically an open tank is not the absolute shrimp killer. The last mistake in the aquarium setup is that the shrimps have too little surface area to graze on. Therefore, in my opinion, breeding aquariums should also contain at least a few plants, stones or roots on which the shrimps can graze biofilm, and also hide from time to time. As already mentioned, this is important for young shrimps as they are still much more stationary when foraging. Aquarium moss in particular, such as Java moss, is a great surface and has always proved its worth in breeding tanks in large quantities. Guys, if you liked the video up to this point, please hit the like button so that the video can be spread to other like-minded people. Thanks for your support. Those were the basics that often lead to the death of shrimp. If you can rule out all these points, let's take a look at the next chapter on toxication. Perhaps you will find what you are looking for here, and your shrimps have died from poisoning. Typical signs that something is wrong are staggering, fidgeting, falling over, frantically swimming around or sitting motionless. The first group I would like to discuss is heavy metals. These include copper, silver, lead, mercury and so on. Copper is probably the most common cause of problems and causes shrimps to die. Copper can be released into the tap water in large quantities if it flows through old copper pipes, for example. The good thing is that copper can be easily detected with conventional water tests and can also be absorbed or removed with an appropriate water conditioner. In this case, copper only poses a risk if tap water is used. Chlorine. Tap water is still often disinfected with chlorine by water suppliers. Chlorine in water is absolutely toxic for shrimps and other invertebrates. So if the animals react with symptoms of poisoning after a water change, it may well be due to chlorine in the tap water. That's why tap water should always be treated before it is used for your aquarium. These water conditioners can bind or neutralize chlorine in the water. Silicate. Silicate is a little bit more complicated because it cannot simply be removed with a water conditioner. When I bought my first red cherry shrimps, I had the problem that they died one by one. It took me ages before I realized that the extremely high silicate level was the cause of the death. The only thing that helps here is using remineralized RO water or filtering the tap water with a special medium like silicatex. Ammonia and nitrite. As mentioned at the beginning, ammonia and nitrite are toxic to shrimp in certain quantities. Therefore, always wait until your aquarium has been properly set up and the nitrogen cycle has established itself. Dead animals should always be removed from the tank immediately. Especially larger dead snails or fish can cause problems in smaller tanks and lead to an increase in nitrite or ammonia. And don't go nuts with the feeding of your shrimps. Pesticides. Many pesticides are highly toxic for invertebrates in the aquarium. There are various ways in which you can inadvertently get them into your aquarium. The most common cause is probably aquarium plants. These are sometimes treated with pesticides so that they can be imported into certain countries. Therefore, they should always be washed well and watered for a few days before being put in. Alternatively, you can safely use sterile in vitro plants. You also have to make sure that you only use fertilizers in the aquarium that are safe for shrimp. Another way pesticides can get into the aquarium is through spraying insect repellent in the house. This stuff can get into the aquarium via an air-driven filter or air stone, for example, and cause mass mortality. But petting a dog and then working in the aquarium without washing your hands first can also bring particles from a tick or flea repellent into the aquarium. That is why you should always wash your hands without soap before working in the aquarium and limit work to what is really necessary. If you feed your shrimp fresh vegetables, there's always the risk that pesticide residues will get into the water. Therefore, if you really want to feed them vegetables, you should make sure that they are organically grown and wash the vegetables carefully before feeding them, and ideally remove the skin. Medication. Medication for ornamental fish, algae or snail repellents in the aquarium can also contain substances that are lethal to shrimps and other invertebrates. It is therefore always important to find out in advance what exactly the product contains and whether it is potentially dangerous for invertebrates. This is because the products mentioned above often contain copper. If a problem does occur as a result of a treatment with a medication, the only thing that helps is a generous change of water and filtering through activated carbon. Activated carbon is ideal for filtering and binding medication residues and toxins from the water column. The last point I would like to make in this chapter is what you should only use aquarium decorations that are intended for aquariums. Otherwise, you never know what substances will be released into the water and which could harm your animals. Did you perhaps use a beautiful Buddha statue from the hardware store for your aquarium setup? Such objects can also alter the water or release substances into the water column in such a way that shrimps can die from them. That's why I always recommend only using natural products or aquarium decorations that are really made for aquariums. If your shrimp colony is slowly getting smaller and smaller and you see less and less animals, but you can't see any dead animals, it may be that your shrimp have simply been eaten by other tank inhabitants. Fish. This cause may seem a little more obvious, but sometimes people still don't realize that fish will eat anything that fits in their mouth. This means that large fish will also eat adult shrimp and smaller fish can eat at least your baby shrimps. In this case you will not find any dead shrimps, but you will be able to observe how your colony is constantly shrinking. Often the shrimps will simply hide if there are too many large fish in the tank. In densely planted aquariums, young animals can survive despite fish stocking, but I still always recommend keeping shrimps in a species tank or together with harmless fish such as very small Rasboras or algae eaters such as Otocinclus. Planarians. Another potential danger are planarians in the aquarium. Admittedly, they do not cause mass mortality, but these carnivorous worms can still be dangerous to freshly molted or weakened shrimps, and they can also eat your baby shrimps. More often the shrimps die from other causes such as poor water quality, and the planarians then feed on dying or already dead shrimps. This increased food supply then allows them to multiply rapidly. In general, planarians also prefer carrion or animals that are easier to kill before they mess with a healthy adult shrimp. If you really have planarians in your aquarium, you can do the following. Feed significantly less to curb further reproduction. You can also use special planarian traps or vermicides, such as no planaria. However, it is important to bear in mind that these products can also kill your snails in the aquarium. For this reason, snails should be removed from the tank before treatment. After treatment, I would recommend filtering with activated carbon. Planaria often enter the aquarium with plants, so if you want to prevent 100% that you introduce these pests via plants, use in vitro plants. You should also only use high quality frozen food, as frozen food can also contain planaria eggs. The next cause of death can be very insidious. It can sometimes take time to recognize it. A bacterial infection. Sometimes there is an increase in death due to bacterial infections. Bacterial infections are not always serious. Sometimes only a few animals die, and sometimes shrimps even recover after a mild infection. It becomes dangerous when the animal's immune system is weakened. This happens, for example, due to unsuitable water parameters, high germ contaminations, unsuitable nutrition, stress and so on. In my opinion, the main cause is a high bacterial load and incorrect water parameters, especially shrimps that come from a very clean habitat with specific water parameters such as Caridinas or Sulawesi shrimps are susceptible to this. If you suspect that you have a bacterial infection in your aquarium, you should act quickly. It should be urgently checked whether an unsuitable environment has led to the outbreak, and the water parameters should be corrected by changing the water. Large daily water changes of 80% will significantly reduce the germ density. Good tank hygiene should be ensured in dirty areas in the tank, and the substrate should be cleaned. Dead animals should be removed immediately so that they cannot be eaten by others. Conspicuous animals should be transferred to a quarantine tank immediately. Tannins in the form of Indian almond leaves or in the form of supplements can be added for support. Tannins can reduce the germ contamination and strengthen the animal's immune system. I use leaf litter as a preventative measure in all my shrimp tanks. The use of an oxidator or a UV sterilizer can also be helpful. I recommend oxidators for very sensitive species such as Sulawesi shrimps. The hydrogen peroxide is broken down in the oxidator, and the free oxygen radicals are very reactive and oxidize or destroy germs and bacteria in the water column. If the infection is too severe and nothing else helps, sometimes the only solution is to set up the aquarium new completely or to treat it with an antibiotic. But always remember that prevention is better than cure. Bad quality shrimps. This cause of death is sometimes not so obvious at first glance. Make sure you buy high quality shrimp, as practically anyone can set up a small tank and try to breed shrimps to make some kind of profit. It is all the more important to make sure that you buy your shrimps from breeders, private persons or stores that have a good reputation. This is particularly important if you are unable to view the tanks and animals yourself, for example when ordering online. If you get poor quality or weak immunocompromised animals from extremely unhygienic tanks, they may die quickly after being put in, even though you haven't actually done anything wrong. Okay guys, that's all the experiences I've had over the years and all the knowledge I've acquired. I hope it was helpful for you and you can use the checklist to find out what is wrong with your shrimp aquarium, or even better, take preventative action to avoid problems in the first place. If you have any further questions, comments or would like to share your experience, please leave a comment below. For the perfect start with your shrimp tank, you should definitely check out my comprehensive guide about shrimp keeping next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.